Raymond Douglas. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm here. I'm blessed. There in the trenches,
Well,
but giving thanks.
yeah, what more could you ask for?
I'm on the pitch. I'm not in the stands.
Oh, I can see we're going to be speaking very metaphorically.
Yep, that's me.
Well, Raymond, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me here at Social Workers Matter. As I briefly explained to you before, although the title is Social Workers Matter, it's my podcast, so I speak to who I want. So that's really great. And quite often speak to people who are not necessarily social workers, but have had contact with social workers by virtue of their roles. And I was just really intrigued to find out some more about you and your work. You and I met because we almost did some training together, and then I was invited to contribute to a sort of recent initiative that you were kind of at the helm of. So that was kind of cool. So you're returning the favor, aren't you?
Indeed. And even if you hadn't showed up amazingly the way you did, I would have still come on your podcast because what you're doing is important.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Really important.
So Raymond, I'm going to call you Ray because that's how you are referred to, if you don't mind.
No problem at all.
So Ray, let's start from the beginning, really. Tell us a bit about who you are and where you're coming from, because it is somewhat untraditional. And from the bits and pieces I've picked up, for instance, I hadn't realized that you were a hip hop person at one point, and
Okay.
I thought, oh, I want to hear about that. So start where you like. But
all right. So you were watching some of the lives, the podcasts and stuff, the vlogcasts.
Well, I've only seen one, but I picked that comment up when we were doing the event the other day.
Okay, yeah. So it's Ray Douglas. I'm from an exotic city called Birmingham. And I always give people a little space to have the giggle. And Birmingham's an interesting city because it's a city that's built off industry and built off economic migrant communities. However, there's no more industry, but there's still economic migrant communities.
Wow.
So
what were the industries?
I'll give you the companies and then it will make sense. So things like HP Source, Cadbury's, Rover, Lucas Aerospace, this just goes on and on and on. If you want to go further back, a lot of the guns from a place called like BSA, a lot of the guns and the chains manufactured at the time of slavery came from Birmingham.
Wow.
So, there's a lot of blood and struggle and stories, and some good stories that have come out of the darkness. But also there's a lot of, it was an intrinsic part of the transatlantic slave history, has a deep history. And as you know, Birmingham doesn't have any cocoa trees, but it manufactures some of the best chocolate in the world. So every person from Birmingham will always tell you two things. The first thing they'll tell you is that we've got more canals than Venice. And the second thing, someone always knows someone who knows someone in UB40.
Okay.
Right. Once again, the canals were quite often used to transport the guns. And so even if you go there now, you have places called like Armory Road.
Okay.
Small Heath was very well known for manufacturing. And also, let's bring it a lot forward. There were an intrinsic city in terms of the war as well, in terms of what they used to manufacture to support the troops in the First and Second World War. So obviously my father is Windrush, and my mother is white Irish. So I'm the love child with the afro in the pram. And what was interesting, you know, when you look back on economic migrants, whether it be the Irish community, whether it be the Afro-Caribbean community, we actually didn't until recently have an African community in Birmingham.
Right.
You know, so it was very much Caribbean, Irish, and then the heritage communities, and sprinkles of others, don't get me wrong, but visibly, and then obviously South Asian, Pakistani, and then Indian, etc. So those were the most children of the colony.
Yes.
So when you go to other cities, and when I say other subcultures and communities, so think like you'll have a very small Yemeni community there, etc. But you wouldn't have West African communities en masse in Birmingham, or East African to that. Obviously, it's changed now, but back then, it was very much 4 or 5 economic migrant communities.
You know what? Can I just
please do
for a second? One of the things I did know, because I've been to Birmingham probably twice, and one of the times I can remember quite markedly was during my sort of community work days. But Handsworth was a kind of a hub of Caribbean communities. Is that true? Is that the case?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Handsworth is Steel Pulse, Benjamin Zephaniah.
Yeah.
You know, I'm from the other side of the city, so I'm from a part called Borsal Heath. Now, Borsal Heath is, funny enough, where people like UB40 are from, Rankin Roger, you know, those kind of musicians.
You know, Benjamin Zephaniah works up here in my local area.
There you go.
University up here. It's a small world, anyway.
But also, my side of the city was notorious as the red light district. So it was the equivalent of Amsterdam back then when I was growing up as a child. Like, you know, literally, women sat in the windows. You know, you'd come home late from a football match, maybe at school or a youth club, and you'd literally see hundreds of women on the street corners.
Wow.
So it's interesting when we look back at that now, and we have discussions now in 2020 and around things like ACEs and trauma and so on, that, you know, I often have a conversation with 2 questions I always ask people: who allowed that to happen? You know, I'm on about, you know, that level of open prostitution, who allowed it to happen? But also, what's the effect? What the effect that had on a generation? So, but once again, out of acorns make trees, and, you know, there were some beautiful moments that came out of growing up in the 70s and 80s where I grew up. A lot more community, a lot more grit, you know, and but you also had mixed tenure communities. So although you had kind of like a certain level of social housing, you'd also have homeowners living on the same street.
All right.
So although there was definitely deprivation in those communities, there was this level of affluency as well, because a lot of people fed into their employment came in from places like working at Rover, Cadbury's, Lucas.
Consistent, steady.
Yeah. And sometimes two or three people in the household working in those big companies, and they were well-paid jobs. So talking about manual dexterity and you know, and manufacturing. Yeah,
skilled labor. Okay, so that's a bit of a sort of a, well, thanks for the information. It's making me now want to come up and have a real good look around. Someone was saying to me the other day that they're going to retire in Birmingham.
Really?
Yeah, they're going to leave London and come up to Birmingham.
That's purely because of the prices of the houses.
Oh, good guess.
So let me put it in perspective. You could probably rent a 4-bedroom house. Let me give you the equivalent of a London area. You could rent a 4-bedroom house in Birmingham in an area the equivalent of like maybe Green Street, Ilford, Ilford Lane, that kind of, you know. So the equivalent house in Birmingham would be on rent for about £750, 4-bedroom, 4 bathrooms, 2 ensuite. In London, I don't even want to get into that.
No, don't even go there.
Right. So you know, when you talk about the North-South divide, and funny enough, when you look at it, the salaries in London aren't massively bigger than the ones in Birmingham. So it's interesting. You know, we don't even need to get into gentrification yet, but It's very difficult to gentrify Birmingham.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very, very difficult. Not because, so the only parts that are gentrified now are the industry parts. So all those factories now that were, and we keep going back to it, but all those factories that were supporting and serving an economic growth are now becoming kind of like bougie, 2-bedroom flats.
Okay, yeah, repurposed.
You know the look, yeah. You know the look, the exposed brick look. Yeah, so that's the kind of, but you'll never see the same type of gentrification that you're having, for example, in Brixton or in Peckham, where communities are like, there's an exodus of communities,
Mm-hmm.
and now all of a sudden the community is looking nothing like what built it.
Yeah, wow, it's fascinating stuff, this, honestly. So you are now, I mean, obviously that's your home, that's where you originate from. And I picked up that you are sort of not necessarily based there now. And how often do you get back there?
So yeah, I mean, I've always got anchors and hearts there, but and family. And because of the nature of my work, I travel a lot anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I also feel that because the hearts have been ripped out of places like Birmingham, and this I see the same thing in places like Sheffield,
Mm-hmm.
that were built upon steel, Manchester the mills, Liverpool the docks. I see a lot of people leaving London to go to Birmingham, funny enough,
Yeah.
because of money.
Yeah.
But also, you know, a place like London, for example, is like what, 10 million people at any given day could be in and out of London.
Too crowded. Mm.
But there's also, some northerner like me, you know, there's a lot of culture and art and conversations that are happening in places like London,
Mm.
and identity that we have in Birmingham, but there'll be one Black Art Center.
Yeah.
There'll be, you know, one kind of major Caribbean restaurant, takeaway.
Mm.
You know, they'll in Black owned. There'll be, and when I say that, that's not taking away from all the good restaurants, but a flagship one, for example. You know, although we've got in Birmingham, we've got 2 football teams, for example, Aston Villa and Birmingham City, and then you've got West Bromwich Albion, and so these 3 teams. You know, when you look in the stands, it looks nothing like Birmingham.
Right.
You know, do you know what I'm saying? But when you come,
when
you come and watch Arsenal, you look in the stands and you see London.
Yeah.
You know,
I don't know. You see, I sometimes feel envious though of regional communities. I mean, I have a lot of family in Nottingham. I've got lots of family in Bradford, in Leeds, and I totally identify with what you're saying in terms of, you know, there being sort of, it feels quite hemmed in, quite small. But I also feel, as someone who was born and raised for the most part in London, that we are quite disparate. And what we try to do is form communities, but it's always a struggle because you've got people living in the north, south, east, and west, and you're trying to sort of bring some kind of cohesion together, and it's a bit more challenging. So I don't know. I guess it's 6 of one, half a dozen the other. But when I do go to these, to see family members in these regional places, you know that if you go to this, you know, in Nottingham, for instance, if you go to the Marcus Garvey Centre, you'll probably see lots of people you haven't seen in ages, and whatever. There seems, you know. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's a total different animal. Let me put it in perspective. Let's take the Central Line, for example. The Central Line's approximately 50 miles, 46 miles, right?
You know more than me, and I'm on it.
if you were traveling from Birmingham, you'd be halfway to London on 50 miles.
Yeah.
The Central Line's 50 miles, more or less, right?
Yeah.
You know, so the vastness of London is there are going to be a lot of gaps and cracks and leaks, but I think, and this isn't, and this is, you know, I like, for example, me personally, I love Manchester, and I hope none of my Birmingham comrades are listening to this, but I believe that Manchester's the second city.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even on my Birmingham. Why? Because when I go there, I see a massive independent culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got one, but I'm on about a big one. And maybe that's, you know, it's very much like, all right, let me give you an example. When you go to Liverpool, whether a person's a Rasta, a Sikh, a Hindu, a white working class, everybody's a Scouser.
Yeah.
They speak the same.
Yeah. Identity.
You know,
Yeah.
the cultures are the same. There's a monolithic culture in places like Liverpool, right? In terms of the way that they speak, etc.
Yeah.
I think places like Birmingham now are evolving, and there's some great things happening there. But I'm really into independent scenes. But what comes out of Birmingham as well is innovation, because we don't get swallowed up by the isms and the schisms and the and kind of like big city visions. So that's why we're back to what I was saying. You know, the reason why you've got the Benjamin Zephaniahs, the reason why you've got the Jasper Carrots, the reason why you've got the UB40s, the Rankin Rogers, and you go on and on and on. The reason is because it's from Handsworth to where I will grow up in Balsa Heath. If there's no traffic, you can get there in 15 minutes.
Wow. Wow. I don't know. I mean, there's something about that I'm a bit envious of, I must say. But I mean, again, I guess I'm older now, and that's probably this yearning for community is probably a bit too romanticized. But I certainly recall when we lived in the Midlands for a while, I was dying to get back to London. So, you know, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And dying to get back to London for the very things that you were saying, more scope, more culture, you know, etc., etc. Anyhow, thank you for that education. Let's move forward. So who are you?
Well, as I mentioned, I'm the love child of this Jamaican man and this Irish mother. So dad arrived in the UK. And you know what? Bless them, because only now as an adult, as a practitioner and someone who you realize the level of determination and grit and resilience that generation had. Absolutely. Like, you know, I often say, me and my friends who were from Caribbean persuasion, like, no, our parents didn't come and watch us play football on Saturday morning in the freezing winter car. Them have all heap of things for do our morning, and we're now going at them cold there, and right, yeah.
Plus, them work the whole week.
Yeah, and you know, and you know,
wow,
and that, you know, but maybe we were looking for the wrong, because what they did establish was foundations. So I, from a very young age, you know, I grew with my father, funny enough. So I kind of, my lens was a Jamaican lens. It was an old school lens, which worked a lot of the time. Sometimes it didn't work, because what we talk about now in terms of double conscience that a lot of young people are suffering with, especially when you're from a migrant community. You know, at home you're something, and out you know, you're something else. But he definitely instilled the values of integrity, spirituality, resilience into me. But he was a phenomenal man. He's passed now. He was a phenomenal man. And you know, I was blessed. And you know, like anybody else, nobody grew up in Disneyland, but the gems that he shared with me. So at primary school, funny enough, it might sound a bit, but I was put up in higher years in primary school. I'd like to think it was because of my intelligence, but it might have been because of numbers. But I know I was put up in older year groups in my classes. But it was the Thatcher years. So, you know, I remember the milk. I remember the milk stopping. You know, I remember teachers on strike. I remember you had to have a packed lunch. I remember, when I look back, you know, there was no pro-social modeling in terms of our teachers. They were very, you know, and some of them really good teachers, but they looked nothing like us. And for irony, when I see some of those schools that I went to, and I see some of the teachers now, I often quite think, well, how did they see us? Because now, as a practitioner, I said, we understand about assimilation, we understand about community cohesion, multiculturalism, we understand about things like big society that never happened. And so I'm coming into school education, the back end of assimilation, going into multiculturalism.
Right.
So, the funny thing now in 2020, the conversation's been had about curriculum and inclusive curriculum, that those conversations weren't even on the table when we were growing up. It was very much, but you knew you were different. You definitely knew you were different. I didn't experience overt racism in school, but but that's by the by, because if it's systemic or if it's institutionalized, it doesn't matter if you feel it overtly, it's still holding you back.
Yeah, it has the impact. Yeah.
Went on to another school, secondary school. I was when I look back, I was an alpha character. And that's good sometimes, but that's bad at the same time. So it wasn't, and back then it wasn't like now where you can apply for 11 plus. You were picked. So I was one of 4, I would say, in a whole year that was picked to do 11 plus for grammar school.
Okay.
But there wasn't the infrastructure around me, meaning I was picked off ability. But when I look to the people either side of me, and actually one other boy, an Irish boy, he might even see this one day or listen to this. He's a scientist now, I believe. But so times are different. And what you start to realize is that you can have ability will take you so far, but you've really got to have agency.
Yep.
That helps. And so when I went to my secondary school, it was this kind of dichotomy of white middle class, and then you had the brown faces from the ends.
Little sprinkle.
Right?
Yeah.
Or from the, and then a few actual middle class brown faces and black faces.
Okay.
So when I went there, obviously secondary school now, right? And when I look back on it, it's interesting. And we have this ongoing joke, me and my friends who went to school, we call it the skiing letter. So the letter at the end of the day, the letter gets put on your desk, and it's year 9s have organized a skiing trip to Austria in October.
Yeah.
You've been told, March that year. The skiing trip's in October, November the same year.
Yep.
So you've got a 6-month window. The trip will cost £400. This is the 80s, by the way.
Yes.
50% deposit, and then families are asked to pay that deposit by the September. And the amount of people just use that letter as into the bin, right? Like basketball.
Ain't gonna happen, mate.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But the sad thing is, it's the nose pressed against the glass scenario, because on the day when everyone who can afford it goes, you're looking out the classroom window, and the minibus is there, and everyone's in the rodeo ski jackets from CNA. And at that point, you realize you and your friends.
CNA, for goodness sake. Yeah.
At that point, you realize you and your friends are actually not the same.
Yep.
Economically.
Yep.
Back to agency, back to infrastructure, back to economics. And I kind of promised myself that if there's ever an opportunity as a parent for my children to go on something like that, they're going. So then I remember getting a letter about NASA. They was going to send one of my children's year groups to NASA.
Oh, wow. In the States?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And I said, you go in? I didn't even need to get to the bottom of the letter because of that.
Yeah.
Then the school cancelled it.
Oh.
I went to the school and said, you can't cancel it. You can't just like announce that, well, we're going to NASA, and then, but they said it was logistics and so on. So there was this big divide, but I was always a creative.
Okay.
I wore the mask. I've always been taller, bigger than most. So I bought into hypermasculinity a lot. In some cases to my detriment, but also it opened doors as well. Like I was in You know, I went to auditions for TV programs. I was on a satellite link with Russian children on TV.
Okay.
Things like that. You know, I was decent at sport. I was in football, cricket, and rugby team at school. And these were kind of natural abilities. But it was very difficult to level up. It's very difficult to go level up, because I just, when I look back on it, because it was very much, you know, I was very much an only child.
Hang on, when you say level up, do you mean what, to enter professional?
Maybe district.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You know, maybe you know, the things that you need is interesting, because I took my young boy to parkour recently. Like the street.
Yeah, well, they do,
street running, but they do an indoor one for kids.
Okay.
And it was over by Millennium Point. No, we call it Millennium Point. Millennium Dome, which is the O2.
Greenwich, Stratford.
Yeah. Over by Canary Wharf. That.
Yeah.
Wherever that is. And it's £20 a session. And I said to my friend, he goes, "Isn't it interesting you're paying £20 for something that we used to do for free, hang off bars?" And but then I look again and I see the demographic that are walking in with their children. So one of my things in life is I put my brown face in places where people are not used to, whether that be galleries, you know, academic spaces.
Absolutely.
You know, I put my spell, because we have a right, and I know that there's so many dreams and so much potential in our communities that have never been fulfilled because of lack of agency, because of not pushing that door. You know, how many, people talk about Lewis Hamilton, but how many thousands of Lewis Hamiltons could there be? People talk about, you know, tennis players. I was at a school yesterday, they were teaching the young people rugby. You know, from a black male perspective, rugby, physically, you know, the skill set that from the athleticism, if young black boys took up rugby, really, you know, but there's loads of places, and I'm not just talking about sport here, but I'm saying is that because of the social economic infrastructure and agency, there are a lot of doors that can't open.
You know, as you were speaking, the other thing I guess that is also bothersome is this whole notion of staying in your lane.
Oh yeah.
And I do think that sometimes for us as people of color, and you know, due to lack of confidence and I guess the sort of the feeling that I'm not going to be wanted, we tend to think to some extent that we need to stay in our lane, and you're absolutely describing the opposite. I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, because it's kind of limiting thinking that I think I'm describing there.
Yeah, it's you know, access to opportunity is a big thing.
Yeah.
And you know, being told, it's from a very young age, you know, you see it in things like football. Historically, you'd very rarely get a black centre midfielder. They'd always put the
Listen,
black.
mate, stop with the football positions. I'm hopeless when it comes to all
really that. Well, look at John Barnes.
Yeah,
John Barnes, one of the greatest players ever to put on an England shirt, right?
Is he a striker?
All I know, you knew the back of the net was. He used to score goals. John Barnes, Jamaican,
yes,
and all that, right? As you know, but I bought a DVD once, and he wasn't even in the top 10 England goals, and he'd score a goal against Brazil in the Brazilian stadium. And you know, it's not about sport, but what it is about, those were the only outlets a lot of people of color had back then.
Yes.
You know, that's the truth. And music and sport. So, but I'm seeing the same thing now in the corporate world. I'm seeing the same thing now in policy. I'm seeing the same thing now in leadership and management. So that the show that we invited you on was around capacity building youth practitioners into leadership management and policy. You know, why are we having that conversation in 2020?
So when you say you're seeing this, you're meaning the absence of?
Of course. It's replicated, isn't it? We talk about institutions.
Not much has changed.
Not much has changed. I think, and apologies if I get my numbers out here, but you know, the last time I checked, we have 15 male black head teachers in the UK. Out of something like 22,000, something crazy like that. or 30, I don't know, you know, or if you incorporate primary schools and right, like 15.
Oh.
So when people like people, especially like using academic, people say, "Oh, how many deans do we have that are black?" But I get it. There's very few. There's less universities. But let's look at schools. So when we talk about young black men and in school and their experiences, one of the conversation people are, well, what about pro-social modeling? What about, you know, I've been into schools where the school is black and Asian and Arab. That's what the school is, and a sprinkle of Eastern Europeans. And when I'm sat in reception about to go in to talk to these young people about breaking the cycle, pushing through, achieving, etc., staying safe, and then I'm sat there in the reception and I look on the board and it's got the pictures of the whole SLT. What is that? What is that? I don't mind. I don't, you know, I'm not saying that we have to have black faces on the board. I'm saying the school is a BAME school, and we don't like using the word BAME. We keep saying this, but so people can hear this. It's a BAME school, and when I'm looking on the SLT, it's the thing that we often talk about, the Guinness syndrome, that the darker you go down the glass, the further you go down the glass, the darker it gets. So at the bottom, school liaison are all brown faces, home school liaison, you know, but you're in the middle of a black and Asian community with 98% black and Asian and Arab and etc. pupils in 2020. So the beautiful thing about 2020 is it's brought rise. People have said, well, let's have a conversation about systemic. And here's the thing. Let me go on record with this. We're not saying that those teachers don't care. We're not saying that then some of them are not saying the same things we're saying.
All right.
But what we are saying is that feels like you can still care. You can still be non-racist. You can still have that, but you can also still be tone deaf. And colorblind.
Absolutely. Particularly if there is a feeling that you're righteous and you're doing all the right stuff. Of course. You're probably more deaf than most in some respects. And I mean, you know, again, as you say, it's not about unsolicited criticism, etc., but it's about honest conversation, I think, isn't it?
Totally. So my creativity at school started to manifest, and to answer your question about the music, in organizing more than having talent. So I was an organizer.
Okay.
You know, organizing the school disco at 14, you know, lobbying and saying I remember the teacher saying, look, every year we come to this disco, and bear in mind now, I've got a high top, I've got an African pendant on, you know, we're looking like De La Soul, right? And we're 14 and we're listening to Public Enemy, and we're listening to Big Daddy Kane, and we're listening to, you know, X-Clan and Poor Righteous Teachers. So we're very much Afrocentric, exposed to Afrocentric hip hop, the early hip hop. And we're saying to the teacher, look, every year we come to this disco, you're playing the Final Countdown. Now, and there's nothing wrong with the Final Countdown. We know it's a big tune, but you're playing the Final Countdown, you're playing rock music, you're playing gothic music, you're playing The Cure, The Smiths. But look at us. This is not what we're about.
Yeah.
So we just stood around the edges. So one year we took it to the head of like the club, youth club, and said, look, we give us that clash, give us a double clash stream. And we turned it into some jam. Like it was like, it was like Saxon versus, right? And we're 14. And then all the young people started coming around from all around the city. And then we moved into the hall. So my school became notorious for the best youth disco in that side of the city. Okay. So I'm talking about hundreds of young people, not just from our school. Now I'm 14, 15. Everybody looks forward to this. The teacher was very liberal. He probably wouldn't get away with that now.
No.
So then it developed into a kind of, not a sound system because we're more hip hop, but definitely DJing and so on. And then started give yourself a name, you know, all that thing. And now we're in this space now where we're known as those kind of guys, and 3 of us from the same school. So we leave school now. 2 of us go to the same college. My other friend, who's an architect now, he goes to grammar school, sixth form, but we keep the music thing going.
Sure.
Then we start creating music, going to the studio. And this is 89,
Wow.
90. Then we get a call. We do a few demos. Then we get a call to say, do you want to go to a certain studio? We meet up with a guy, becomes our manager. Then our first show in Birmingham is supporting Rebel MC, which is Congo Natty now. He had kind of like pop star acclaim. We turned it out. I was even shocked. We was talking about it the other day, funny enough, with the same, it's still close friends with Mo. And then all of a sudden we get a call, Ice-T's coming to town.
Uh-oh. Wow.
Do you want to be the support act?
Wow.
I'm 17.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. And lo and behold, we do well. Then now it's serious.
Yeah.
So every day we're working it out. Every day we're creating. Every day we're staying together and develop. Then when you pushing out your demos. Now me, I wasn't the greatest, but you couldn't outwork me or out-organize me. And that's one of the things that I talk about. Yeah. You know, I say this to people all day long. Talent will only take you somewhere.
That's right.
But you can't, if you can't, someone who outworks you will always win. That's why you see so many people in the corporate world, in academia, in sport, that someone might not have the same talent as you, but they will outwork you. Like you teach essentially social work, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And you know the difference between your students who are academically bright, but when it comes to deadlines, when it comes to putting in those hours, when it comes to, you know, their talent can't take them there.
That's right.
But then you'll have someone who doesn't grasp concepts that easily, but you're getting the emails off them, the messages, they're checking in with you, they're asking for that one-to-one, they're in the library, they're living and breathing it.
Yeah.
And then they're getting through.
Yeah.
And that's it. So it's that black, and you know, so, and for long, we get in the end, we get a deal, we get a record deal.
Okay.
And it was interesting because you not only got a record deal, you got a salary. And then you're on the tour. But remember, it's 1990, whatever. It's not like now where British black music is pop music, meaning, you know, there's back then you kind of like this small minority of an underground scene.
Yeah, mainstream was mainstream.
Yeah, mainstream was pop music and Stock Aitken and Waterman and all of that stuff. And then all of a sudden we're just turning up at festivals, mud everywhere. You don't even want to get your trainers dirty. You know, you walk in your dressing room, there's no food, but there's beer from the floor to the ceiling. You're far from home. But what I learned there in that world was the power of persistence and the power of what I mentioned earlier about grit and going through.
Yeah, and consistency and hard work.
Definitely. So running alongside that though, so part of that was I used to go to a youth center, Bernardo's Youth Center. And I'm only saying that now because I posted a tweet about it today, because it's Youth Work Week right now.
Okay.
Yeah, 2020.
Okay.
And I got someone sent me a DVD of some footage of me in 92.
Oh, wow.
So while I was doing the music, I was volunteering as a youth worker, and then I got a paid job, part-time job. So I became a youth leader. And so running parallel to my creative, I'm still doing that. I'm learning. There's one Ras called Leonard. I will always be in debt to him because he saw something in me and said, you know what, come on board. I don't know if it was to keep me out of trouble. I don't think it was, but I do know that it changed the way that I thought. I exited the music world years later and went on a path of knowledge of self.
Okay.
Continued with the youth work. And then went on to do adult teacher training. So I've got this youth work background. I'm from Birmingham, I'm a creative, I'm semi-known. I'm known as those guys who were on MTV because that's how far we got. We're on
Oh,
MTV
wow.
Raps, MTV Raps actually.
Mm-hmm.
And but all of a sudden, oh, you're not doing music anymore. So I'm doing the youth aspect, but I'm also want, you know, I go kind of strip it all back. I go and work in a factory. That's just making me brain dead. You know, the frequency was too low there for me.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say nothing wrong working in a factory, but I'm not I just the way that people were communicating, that kind of mindset.
Yeah.
It wasn't working for me. So then I went on to retrain as an adult teacher. As soon as I got that pen in my hand in front of that smart board, I started to understand concepts around schemes of work and curriculum and this delivery, and then I just bit it and loved it. However, at that time, then we had the big spike in youth violence in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
And it became notorious as the gang capital. Now, what's interesting, 2020, Birmingham is still the gun crime capital of the UK.
Oh, wow.
So those areas that they mentioned earlier, the Handsworths and the Newtowns and the Balsa Heaths, although they're kind of so close to each other, there was only really, like back then, 2 main gangs for the most part. It's not like now where there's 20.
Yeah.
So we saw a spike in violence because those people who were young are now young adults. And now we've got the whole situation, you know, which kind of got tarnished, where they tried to label Jamaican immigrants yardies.
Yes.
Which was disingenuous and inappropriate. However, there's clearly a change that's happened where now crack is in the city, right? And you just saw violence. I wasn't a part of that in terms of as a young adult.
Okay.
But I felt that there needed something to be done.
And you would have been the same age, same age.
Same age as it.
Yeah.
So I was in my youth work. I was invited to Northern Ireland to study conflict resolution, and I was so inspired that I stole the lecturer's flip chart notes and brought them back on the plane, because it was the first. I told him, but you know, I'm just looking at these flip chart notes for the whole lecture, how he's broken down transformative youth work versus diversionary youth work. So everyone's looking at it. I'm just looking at, I've got to get those flip charts and take them off there and bring them back on the plane. Yeah, that's it.
Repurpose them, make use of them. Yeah. That's what it's about, isn't it? Application.
There you go. So I brought them back, and then I understood the concepts, and then I developed a program called Anti-Youth Violence. So Anti-Youth Violence was addressing violence with young people.
Right.
What was happening though, I was getting a lot of calls, and back then it was a lot of school age. I was getting a lot of calls where schools would call me and say, "Can you come and run programs?" Say, "Yeah, okay." And I'd get to the school, and the head teacher would, you know, remember this head teacher's in a hotspot area. She's on about 80 grand. "Oh, Ray, thanks for coming. We've got a real serious gang problem. Our children are wearing multicolored shoelaces."
Oh dear,
there you go. So what? Once again, I step back and think, well, yeah, we're working with the young people, but where's the CPD for the practitioners?
Yeah.
Now, then I developed a program called Gangology. So we had anti-youth violence for the young people, the service users, for want of a better word. Then the CPD was Gangology. So, because back then, if you were studying criminology at university, there was no gangs module.
No.
Youth work, there was nothing about county lines. You know, it's like if you studied IT 20 years ago, you weren't studying Bluetooth technology. You definitely weren't studying AI. So there was definitely a glitch in academia as it relates to responding to gangs. They've caught up now, no doubt.
Well, absolutely. I've got students who've done whole dissertations on this.
Yeah, but back then
the knowledge wasn't there.
No,
the research wasn't there.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I do think gangs were seen as almost badged in the same space of antisocial behavior.
Yeah,
it was never thought. People would never think it would be young British-born young people discharging guns in the daytime on high streets with no balaclava and no gloves, like real violence. And the thing is, the violence wasn't necessarily connected to wealth. The violence was connected to violence.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden we have this spike, and this isn't the Jamaican nationals that they blamed in the media. This is British-born young people. Some cities were ahead in terms of others, in terms of the response, but I didn't see a multi-agency approach that was needed. And still till today, I would say, although there's a lot's been done and we see the whole conversation about public health response to violence, I ask anyone who's listening to this, and I've got your details, I'm sure, show me a co-located multi-agency gang unit. There's two words I said there: co-located, multi-agency. So they share printers, they share intel, they share caseloads.
I mean, I'm trying to think, even in the sort of the last job I had in the field, and we'd have sort of panel meetings.
Yeah, they still have them.
But sharing the same, no, that didn't exist.
So here's the thing, to bring it closer to home. Back then, when I used to deliver the training to practitioners, there weren't social workers on the courses.
Wow.
2020, when I deliver the training, it's 90% social workers.
Yep.
Right. And it's interesting, this switch. There used to be so many youth workers back then, but now it's not youth workers, it's social workers, or people who are connected, or the other thing, the systemic family therapists.
But I mean, that also relates to the sort of the decimation of youth services as well, surely.
Definitely.
Because there was a point where you'd have your youth centers, your youth workers, your detached youth workers, etc., and all these resources have been wiped out. So
Totally.
you know what I mean. So I'm sure that has something to do with it too. But anyway,
and the nature of the portfolios as well.
Yeah.
So the vulnerabilities and the not the new, the acknowledged issues around things like county lines, because I do a split screen icebreaker when I deliver training, and I ask who's watched Top Boy, and attendees will put their hand up. Okay, is there county lines in Top Boy? Is there knife crime? Yes. Is there DV? Is there sexual abuse? Is there all these? Is there substance misuse? Yeah. And then I said, well, actually, it sounds like you've described Peaky Blinders to me. And because in Peaky Blinders, obviously set about 100 years ago or whatever in Birmingham, when they're sending young kids on the canal boats to Camden to sell illegal whiskey, is that not county lines?
Yeah.
When there's conflict between areas and there's knife crime, is that not postcode beef? When there's DV at home, it's the same. So there's a principle. There's nothing new under the sun.
No.
But however, in Birmingham last year, there was a festival called the Peaky Blinders Festival.
Okay.
Everyone wore flat caps and waistcoats, and I always asked them, would you think in 100 years from now there'd be a Burger Bar and Johnson's festival talking about gang violence? So what we see now is the voyeurism around violence, alongside the gentrification of it. So I feel that as practitioners, things have come a long, long way, and that's really inspiring. However, I still think there's a massive, massive vacuum. I do not believe that a lot of the work is community centered.
No, and I'm trying to think now back to my time in the field, and a lot of it's seems to be around intelligence, gathering information. But what do you do with all that? If the police know this person, social services know this person, perhaps an agency that might be a charity or a voluntary organization knows this person. But what are we doing with all of that intelligence? And sometimes it feels as though we just want to know because we want to know, because we need to put it in an assessment report. But what are we actually doing with that in terms of a response to help, to circumvent, to move people out of that sort of space. That's where I think we're coming a cropper. And I guess the work you're doing is essentially about trying to move that on. So what are you doing? What is the work you're doing, Ray?
I think the thing for me is responding to youth violence in this country cannot be a project. It has to be a movement.
Okay.
When I say a movement, it has to have legs. There's big national organizations that work in cities like where I'm from that have no equity there. Big national organizations based in big cities, but they come and, you know, they roll out programs, but they have no equity in the community. I'm not saying, I'm not saying that they don't care. I'm not saying that there's not good people in those teams. I'm saying it's like regeneration, right? Now look at regeneration. Think about regeneration. You change the street lights, you put some new benches in, you paint the walls,
you put more cameras in.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
But that's painting over damp. So return back to those regenerated areas 10 years later. Is there more opportunities for employment? Has the violence been reduced? You can't paint over damp. What happens? In the end, damp comes through.
Absolutely.
So
we used to call it the sticking plaster.
The sticky plaster, yeah, and gaping wounds. So for me, you've got to bring communities on the journey with you. So when you ask what I'm doing, well, I'm showing on a very brass tacks level that this violence is by design. And when I mean by design, I'm not talking about in some conspiratory way. What I'm saying is that who benefits? If a young person gets locked up for 10 years and a private company, private prison charges £38,000 for that young person, that's nearly £500,000. Right? If these schools can only recruit, and there's nothing wrong with tutus, but if they can only recruit teachers with tutus and not recruit teachers with first, who loses out? Right? If we're surrounded by fried chicken shops, all right, and we're surrounded by youth centers that are closed, and so that's what I'm saying, bringing the community on the journey with you. And that's by capacity building them. That's by saying, on a very raw level, how are we killing each other over postcodes and we both live in social housing? We have no equity. And when I say we, I'm on about from a Black perspective.
No,
how is that happening?
No equity. Yep.
No, show me any other community where that's happening. Now, there are communities where they are involved in that lifestyle. Birmingham's got a lot of communities that are middle-class ghettos. So although there's high levels of violence and drugs, it's full of homeowners.
God, what a mess.
Yeah. But once again, it's like anything, isn't it? The bird born in the cage thinks that flying is insanity. And that's what, to ask what we try and do. When I say we, there's a lot of people who are working around this. What we try and say is just push that cage door open and you'll see a different world. Yeah. And that's what it's about for me.
All right, Ray. So tell us, give us a little bit more of the detail then in terms of.
Well, I've worked in 20 prisons.
Okay.
Across the country, male, female, young offenders institutes, children's secure units. So the youngest murderer I've worked with is 12. I believe this is the hack. The hack is the sweet spot between academia and community work. So evidence-based community work. So you can have this highbrow thinking in academia and its theories and its reports and its research, but I'd love to know if the criteria was of that theory and research and reports, if the criteria was you have to evidence how it's going to trickle down, there would be a lot less reports.
Yeah, they'd be too busy helping it to trickle down, mate.
Yeah. Then when we look at community, and this is an honest conversation, the community was saying, well, no one can't deny your passion, but it's not evidence-based. So the sweet spot is that place in the middle. So you equip communities with the knowledge and the theology and the pedagogy and all this, and break it down. And so it goes upstream. Right? So there's either or a lot of the time. It's definitely getting better, as I said, because but when we talk about a public health response to violence, you have to invest it like a public health response to violence. You can't just say it. So you have to deal with it like it's diabetes. You have to deal with violence like it's STDs, like it's smoking cessation. That level of investment. You can't be saying to communities that are decimated with violence, organizations are requested to apply for £5,000 to work with gangs. A stabbing costs £300,000. A shooting costs 1.4 million based upon a social return of investment model. So if you're not investing in it, if you're not vesting in the issue, then we're going to be here every year. And it's not solely money that will resolve that. It's back to what I said. It's about theory and application of theory. And that's where we're at. That's telling the truth to communities. Yeah. Some are biting, some aren't. But, you know, we cannot continue the way it's going with younger people being involved. You know, there's a real interesting theory about violence adjacent communities. So when we're talking now about vicarious trauma, so are we saying most of these communities, they're now suffering from vicarious trauma if the violence is the norm? And it should never be the norm, because my parents, and I'm showing the same with you, we're not from that cloth.
No.
We're not niggers, right? We're not, you know, my dad didn't come here to boss his gun. You know, that wasn't the 90s, whatever report you read, 96% of people from the Caribbean came here with a skill and or a trade. 0% came with a criminal record, because you couldn't come here with a criminal record. So what has happened in 60 years? So when I'm walking across a prison yard, having delivered a class, and I look to the left and I see the exercise yard, and there's 90+% Black, Asian young men in there. What has happened? Because that's not where their parents are from, or their grandparents. So that's it for me. It's about breaking the seal on not just the systemic nature of it, but about rebuilding, revisiting knowledge of self.
Okay.
You know?
That sounds like a useful approach. And so you work in prisons, or you have worked in prisons,
schools, colleges, universities, primary schools. You know, and I don't change my slides. You know, and
that's handy.
No, because I was delivering to some SEMH teachers yesterday, funny enough, and I talked to them about, you know, people know me, I talk a lot about music and games and films and the effects it has on young people. So we use Tim Westwood as a case study, right? Tim Westwood, notorious DJ, been around forever. Tim Westwood is 61 years old with a trap channel. Private school educated. Dad was a bishop. Tim Westwood promotes black rage. He promotes murder. He promotes misogyny. He promotes black genocide, right? As a 61-year-old man. Now, I was training some social workers, funny enough, in Bolton, and there was this guy, you've probably met a similar character, been in the sector 27, 28 years, burnt out, had enough. Every other year he turns up, they're changing the direction. And he was just sighing throughout the whole training session. And then he said, I did the case study with Tim Westwood, and then he leant forward and he said, he reminds me of Jimmy Savile.
Wow.
Now here's the thing, but here's the thing, he wasn't referring to sexual exploitation. And then it dawned upon me, yes, this is what it is. And I remember where you heard this word first, anyone listening. This is called CVE, child violence exploitation. Because if a 61-year-old white middle-class man can have a channel on YouTube and on radio where he's promoting violence, promoting misogyny, promoting the term nigger, promoting all these things year on year, and you and me and others up to recently were paying for it because he was on BBC before, so it's part of your license. Well, clearly there's a problem here, because guess what, so Dr. Sylvia, if he was a South Asian Pakistani man with a beard and all those young men in his studio were white working class males in balaclavas from the Isle of Dogs, that show would get shut down. We would start talking about grooming. We would start talking about exploitation. We would probably even start talking about, are we sure he's not radicalizing these young people?
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Yep. So why not have the same
threshold?
Yeah. That makes absolute sense.
Right?
Makes sense.
Because you can't see it. And I say once again, I said, you show me any other genre of music where you think about any other community, white, Asian, any community, where the worst name you can call them as a racial slur is dominant culture in the content of the lyrics. So when, you know, and people like Stormzy do great work, I'm not taking that away from them. You know, Grenfell work that they do, bursaries to Cambridge, phenomenal pieces of community work, really putting their neck out and supporting communities. But when I sit back and I watch them at Glastonbury, and I see white middle class people given a license for 90 minutes to scream out nigger lyrics. That couldn't happen, because they wouldn't get a license to scream out homophobic lyrics or anti-Semitic lyrics. But how's there a license to speak? You know, we're both from the Caribbean, I believe, right? You ever heard your parents or grandparents use the word nigger?
Hold on a second there.
No problem.
Typical. Lockdown and Amazon. Anyway, no. So in answer to your last question, no. So sorry, carry on.
So that's what it is for me. It's about, you know, I've worked for the local authority for many years as well. You know, I was given a kind of a free role to develop things. So I'm always thankful for that. However, this thing is not about projects. You know, this isn't about, you know, thinking that this is going to go anyway anytime soon, go away anytime soon. This is about, just like this is like the systemic inequality, we have to look at systemic change.
Okay.
I'm a firm believer that the answers lie within communities. However, you have to teach peace. You have to teach the example I just gave you then, which makes people sit back and think, oh yeah, you know what? You have a point there. Let me write to the BBC and explore this further. Let me call out a few people, because you know, the concept now, they talk about calling in before you call out. But there are people exploiting youth violence. There are people who are not just celebrities, but organizations.
This is why when you spoke earlier about who benefits, that's for me where the linkage is, because, you know, as much as we are kind of horrified at what's going on in our communities and so on, there are other sections who are making a whole heap of money
totally
from it. You know, that it doesn't make sense.
Of course. And now back to my experience of being an artist. Now, you know, Black British music is pop music, and it's the number one genre. There's no black charts anymore, or urban charts. Remember, you used to open the Voice newspaper to see the independent urban charts.
Yes.
That's the only time you see it. And then if you ever heard like Shalimar were on top of the pops, or, you know, someone, you know, yeah. Oh my God, he done the moonwalk, right? So now the world has changed, you know, Britain has changed, the UK's changed, Birmingham changed. And when I work up north, far up north, Holland, Wigan and all those places, the young people look exactly like the young people in East London, in Birmingham. Same dress, same cadence, same vocabulary.
Yeah.
The culture's so close now. The intersectionality of youth culture is so close.
I was talking to someone about that just the weekend, actually. Yeah, you close your eyes, you can't tell the difference.
Yeah, I walked into a school yesterday up north in the Black Country. Young black white kid in the Black Country, you know, those kind of like yam towns, we call them, right? I walked in, he's saying to me, "My G." Right?
Oh my goodness.
And I'm cool with it, but the thing is, so that's what I'm saying, and it's because of things like this. It's because that this world is now so close. You know, we could bring someone in Alaska into this live feed. I think so. For me, I and this is not taking away from the good work that a lot of people do, both from the voluntary sector and the statutory sector. People like probation officers and social workers and youth offending workers. Everyone's grafting. People are working hard.
They're trying their best. They're trying their best.
But when a probation officer says to me, "I've got 96 people on my caseload," and they've worked it out, they're able to see them 18 minutes a week maximum. That's warehousing. I'm sorry.
And
when a social worker is saying to me, true story, Dr. Sylvia, she was in my training session once, and I was talking about. I start my training with. I ask 5 questions. Who's worked around CSE? Who's worked around county lines? Who's worked around extremism gangs? And the hands keep going, hands keep going, hands go. And now I said, now put your hands up if you get clinical supervision. And then it's that radio silence.
Well, let me tell you something, my dear. I'm part of a group who, you know, we're sort of trying to push that whole agenda forward. The necessity for reflective practice, for reflective supervision, clinical supervision, relationship-based work. I mean, you know, it's all part of what we're trying to change, but it's going to be hard because those caseloads are sky high. And what we're going to get back from folk is, how can we do this?
Totally.
Where's the time to do it?
Totally.
So
let me bring it closer to home. So in that training session, a social worker came to me at lunch and she said, "Ray, can I speak to you?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "You know, you said that at the start of the session. Can I share with you what happened to me?" Said she was pregnant. She was like heavily pregnant, but she was still working. And she had to, there was a family, the child was at risk. And she started with this saying that we had to remove the child out of the house, but we couldn't do it straight away. So kept going back to the house, but they knew that eventually they'd have to remove the child from the house. Now the house, obviously this toddler's seeing this person consistently come into the house. And it got to the stage where she had to remove the child from the house and then hand it over into foster care. She said the baby, people can't see this, or you're listening, the toddler was holding on to her. So not holding on to her mum, holding on to her as she's trying to give her to the, now bearing in mind, she's 6 months pregnant, give her 6 or 7 months, giving her to the foster carers. And the baby's screaming, seeing her as her loved one. She said, "I went and cried in my car for 1 hour after. And then I brought it up in my managerial supervision. And her supervisor said, 'I hope you're not getting soft.'"
Wow. Oh my word. That is absolutely classic, right?
You know, I don't have the dog in this fight, as I'm not a social worker.
Wow.
When she said that to me.
Wow.
Right. Now that's not what, I'm not saying that's common practice in social work. I'm saying, imagine if she went home and strung herself up. Imagine if she went home and started self-harming, because the nature of it is this: if you're around all that trauma, very few people can close their laptop, go home, watch Netflix and have their dinner.
That's right. Unless you're inhuman.
And I saw the same with prison officers. Then they're telling me that if you take a certain amount of days off sick, as a social worker, then you're on a performance plan. And I get it.
I'm glad you're raising these points, because in a way, it does speak to the environment. And, it does speak to what things have become. And these people are expected to serve those so-called hard to reach, those vulnerable groups. What kind of human being are we kind of producing? How are they going to help these people?
And that's what I say to practitioners: you either work off adrenaline or you work off energy. Adrenaline's good, but in the end, you're going to hit the wall. So if you're exposed to all these things, and it depends how you're wired. Don't get me wrong. I've worked with prison officers who they just said to me, there's prison officers who can't take the trauma. There's other prison officers who say, mate, I just cut them down and go home and have my dinner. And that's not indicative of prison, because I'm saying people are wired different. Some people can do it, but I do believe it will manifest in their life in other ways.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Right? No doubt.
Because we're not savages.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely no doubt. So
now we're moving into this space where there's this space now where youth workers are doing social work and social workers are doing youth work, right? Why, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying they're doing the work, but I'm saying is they're in these spaces.
Yeah. And
till today, I'll ask people this. Do you know a gangs unit that you can refer a young person into? A multi-agency gangs unit? And you're going to hear a lot of radio silence. So practitioners are picking up the work and they're holding cases. And and I would say this, the management of the cases is really good, but does that move the needle? As we talk about transformative.
Absolutely not at all. And as I said to you earlier, we are gathering lots of intelligence. But how does that translate into support and help and transformation? Well, no, it doesn't. We just gather all the, and it's interesting that people come into these spaces and they feel great that they know all this stuff and they know about all this stuff. This is groups of professionals now, but how can we translate that into, as you say, moving the needle or transformation of those who are affected? And that's, I guess, where we need more emphasis and focus, because it ain't happening right now. It's not being resourced.
Because you can't get well in the place that made you sick in the first place.
Yeah.
We know that now. We know why mental health is the way it is. And it's not because, it's because someone got sectioned from that flat. And then when they're released, they go back to the flat. But upstairs is still the guy who serves them weed. And downstairs is that neighbor they don't get on with. And 2 doors down, and then next door, they don't stop playing music. And 2 doors down that way, there's a dog that frustrates them. Right? So you're asking people to get well in the place that made them sick. And I think I'm just really passionate about teaching people what the trap is. And when I mean the trap, not the trap house, teaching, look, and just showing it. And, if you look at great leaders and thinkers, they just showed you, whoever adhered to it, whoever didn't. I really believe that we need leadership now. That's where I'm at. Like at the moment, especially around youth violence, we've got adults advocating on behalf of young people. So clearly we have to capacity build young people, but also we need leaders. We need people to deconstruct violence, because it's become normal in a lot of communities. Now it's become part of popular culture. There's a song called Air Force Ones. It was first trap song that got in the pop charts. The chorus says, "I had to run a man down in my Air Force Ones. Now I've got a crease in the middle," which translates to us elders as, "In pursuit of me going to kill someone, I only ended up creasing my trainers." Now, little children in playgrounds are singing that. God. Right? Funky Friday, Dave does a lot of great work. He's outspoken. He spoke eloquently around the whole racial justice issue. But that song, Funky Friday, that's got 65 million views on YouTube, majority of the song is about county lines. Yeah. My youngun's in country plugging the Z, and he can't come back until anything's left.
Wow.
It's #1 in the UK pop chart, 65 million views on YouTube. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Those views are not from the black lads from the flats.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'm tired of seeing films with the black lads from the flats, by the way. Where's the rom-coms? You know, where's the films called Graduate? Where's the film? You know, where's the film about 3 young inner city males who changed their name to get into university? Like a Gregory's Girl, but right?
Yeah.
They get into, you know, and that's where I'm at with it. I'm like, look, just tell people to hold the lens and tell the truth and keep it moving.
Yeah. And you know, those other stories are worthy to be told. And yeah, people will follow them if they're given that sort of worthiness.
Of course.
Listen, Ray, I'm very respectful of your time, and we've been chatting for ages. So I want us to sort of round up now, because no doubt you have other things to do. But are there any sort of final messages that you kind of want to share? Is there anything that you're doing or are about to do at the moment that we need to know about? How do people get in touch and follow your work and your progress and so on?
I mean, yeah, in terms of people, I think, you know, we look at the griot tradition of how, you know, the griot and how communities would mobilize back in the day, where you'd have a poet and they'd speak about the issues facing the community.
Yeah.
And I really think there's a lot of people who have important things to say, but have lost sight of the community. Dr. Martin Glynn talks about, I mentioned it on our show the other day, that you can go from the ivory tower to the ebony tower. And when I say we as people of color, we should not forget that we got to keep going back and teaching our communities.
Absolutely.
Right now, you know, and, you know, one of the fundamental things from an academic perspective, a lot of people of color will talk about getting into academia. And when they got into academia, they just faced a different type of racism. Get into, you know, and I feel that it's incumbent upon people to teach what they know.
Absolutely.
Just teach what you know. That's all it is. That's the handover. And you know, when I say you, like, you're doing this on your platforms. We're in a world now where you can log on and teach what you know. You don't even have to be in the community hall anymore. We're in COVID anyway, so it works better. And then you might say one thing that changes the trajectory of one person's life and their family.
Yeah.
That's it. Let's not try, you know, and that's what it's about. It's about grabbing whoever wants to be grabbed, who's ever working with them. And that's it. Because just like anywhere, like the community is a hiding place for community activists, but so's academia, a hiding place for academics.
Yep.
And there's a sweet spot in the middle. And once you, like, there's a really good program, actually, funny enough, in here in London, that because a lot of people who work around youth violence agenda often come from the lived experience perspective. What they're doing in London is now capacity building them, working around things like risk, trauma management, you know, safeguarding, and that's really good. In terms of finding me, I'm on Twitter at Gangology.
He's also done a TED talk, if you want to know.
Yeah, I tick that box, and I weren't listening. It's like I've always been radical, because when you do the TED talk, they say, look at in front of you, there's a timer.
Yeah.
So I think I had 17 minutes, right?
Yeah.
But every time I kept looking down, I'm like, why is this on 10? What they didn't tell me that it's a countdown, not a count up.
Okay.
So my TED talk's about 23 minutes. So I just start philosophizing. But the good thing about the TED talk, out of everything that I did, because it wasn't once again, you know, it wasn't speaking to the gallery, but the people who needed to hear what I was saying weren't in the audience.
Yeah.
So what I did is I reverse engineered it and asked that question for some of those who live in those leafier suburbs. Why aren't there gangs in your suburbs?
Yeah.
You know, what is it, because your bins get collected on time? You know, is it because you see the same doctor twice when you go to the doctors? Oh, you don't know there's such thing as locum doctors, where a lot of these communities don't even get to see the same doctor twice. And quite often that doctor doesn't even give them eye contact. So when we talk about this whole systemic nature of things, and what I try and do to close, Sylvia, I try and, those young people growing up now, when they get the letter about skiing, they might miss it this year, but they're going to go next year. And I don't want them to be that child who looks out the window and sees their friends who thought they were friends, the CNA rodeo ski jackets on. You can see it traumatized me, right?
Ray, CNA don't exist no more.
Exactly. Exactly. But I'm context it. And they know that, okay, because of that lack of opportunity and agency, that they don't fulfill their dreams. And, you know, not lowering the waterline, like a lot of the generation we grew up in, those Thatcher years, where our waterline was lowered for us. No one spoke to us about university back then. No one spoke to us about certain specific, we had to find out. And that's what it is. So when talk about aim higher, you know, there shouldn't be only 15 male black teachers in the UK now in 2020. Especially if they're telling us exclusions of black boys are so high. So and that's it really. It's about your offering, because this our lived experience, our life here is finite. And there's got to be a handover. So thank you for inviting me. I love what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. It's been an absolute education as usual, in speaking and in listening to you. I just think we just need to do more of this, and I hope you can come back again and we can get a few more people in.
Definitely
in a debate.
Definitely. I mean, I'm really toying with the idea of running an equal equity show weekly, and around current affairs. And I think you know, we
try bi-weekly.
Yeah. I hear you. But you know what's interesting? I mean, the second lockdown starts tomorrow, so people know where we are. You know, this platform and these platforms aren't going anywhere. You know, and it's important that we utilize them.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I was speaking with some colleagues and they were sort of talking about the struggles with using it, but trust me, it's opened up a whole new world for so many of us. Even even the thing we did the other day, how on earth would we have logistically got together had we not done it that way?
Truth.
So, you know, let's make the absolute best of it. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
But
appreciate you, and you know, I'll invite you on to the next one. And I think we're gonna, you know, this is the new TV.
Yeah, trust me, mine hardly ever goes on now. But no, I think you're absolutely right, and I'd be more than happy to contribute, and to learn. I mean, I'm also thinking perhaps we need to start trying to see if we can get young people on in these spaces too. You know, do some of that work.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Well, Ray, take good care.
Yeah.
Stay safe and well. And
Likewise.
you know, sincere thanks.
Likewise. Peace.